The Dagger Room Murders Part 1. Chapter 1. The Fourth Blade. Ash hung in the air like old perfume, bitter, clinging, ceremonial. The chapel at Ashbrook Manor had not held a congregation in 40 years. Ivy strangled its outer walls, and the stained glass saints had long since forgotten their faces. And yet, on that particular morning, the bell rang. Not for Mass, but for murder. Detective Elias Vane stood in the doorway, his long coat brushing the cracked marble floor. A former man of renown, now mostly whispered about in scandal-tinged corners, he lit a match with gloved fingers and let the flame hover before him, just long enough to catch the scent of decay and wax. The body lay on the altar. A man in his 40s, dressed in ceremonial black. Hands folded unnaturally across his chest. Lips sewn shut. And through his heart a dagger. Not just any dagger. This one was ancient, silver, tarnished at the hilt, the blade engraved with a thorned crown. Its placement was exact, surgical, ritualistic. Elias stepped forward, ignoring the gasps from behind. 3 of the manor's remaining heirs stood in the shadows: Miss Genevieve Ashbrook, Lord Edwin Ashbrook, and the youngest, a pale-eyed boy named Samuel. All silent. All watching him. Vane knelt at the corpse's side. No blood pooled. No signs of a struggle. No window, no hidden door, no secret passage that could explain how the killer entered a sealed chapel with no key. "It's the fourth," murmured Genevieve. Her voice trembled like a violin string left in the cold. 4 heirs dead. 4 locked rooms. And always, the dagger. Elias didn't reply. He studied the hilt again. Its design was too deliberate, too ornate to be coincidence. A crown wrapped in thorns, its base inlaid with onyx. He'd seen it once before. Long ago. In a book that should never have survived the war. He looked up slowly, eyes scanning the chapel walls, where portraits of ancestors loomed like judges from the dark. "Seal the room," he said softly. "And bring me every record you have on the family." Samuel blinked. "Why?" "Because," Elias replied, standing with the grace of someone who once carried truth like a badge and now wore it like a burden. "This isn't a murder. It's a message." Chapter 2. The Letter with No Seal. The fire in Elias Vane's study flickered like it knew something he didn't. Back in his London flat, dimly lit, stacked high with forgotten case files and unopened bottles of wine turned bitter, Elias sat alone, a blackened match in hand and the letter in front of him. It had arrived 2 nights before the chapel murder. No return address. No postmark. Just aged paper folded once, precisely, and slipped beneath his door like a calling card from the past. He read it again. Underscore. Mr. Vane. They have begun again. The circle reforms, and the daggers are not done. You were once close enough to the truth to lose everything. Come to Ashbrook Manor. There will be another death. You know the pattern. Signed only by necessity. A friend of the Thorns. Underscore. There was no seal, no symbol, no flourish. But Elias felt the message press deep into his mind like a hand over his mouth. The daggers are not done. He opened the drawer to his left. From beneath loose sketches of locked rooms and red-stained maps, he pulled out an old photograph. Faded and curling at the edges, it showed a group of 7 people. All dressed in ceremonial robes. 6 of them faced the camera. 1 stood with their back turned. The same crown of thorns visible on their collar. He turned the photo over. A single word was scrawled on the back in delicate script. Ashbrook. The next morning, he was on the first train north, watching fog roll over the countryside like spilled milk. The air grew colder the closer he came to the estate, as though the place had its own weather system, its own atmosphere of dread. At the Ashbrook gate, the butler, Mr. Farrow, hunched and skeletal, opened the door without greeting. Mr. Vane, he rasped, bowing slightly. You were expected. Elias raised an eyebrow. By whom? Pharaoh merely gestured toward the manor's gaping black entrance. The house remembers. As Elias stepped over the threshold, the wind closed the door behind him with a decisive slam. Somewhere deep in the manor, the bell began to toll again. Chapter 3: Ashbrook Manor. Ashbrook Manor did not welcome visitors. It endured them. Elias Vane stood beneath its vaulted archway, the scent of old stone and dried lavender brushing past him like a whisper. The great oak doors creaked shut behind him, muffling the wind outside. Within seconds, silence returned, a silence that seemed to listen more than it rested. The entrance hall was a cathedral of shadows. Black and white marble tiles stretched outward in a chessboard pattern, dulled by time. Twin staircases spiraled upward like frozen ivy, vanishing into the gloom above. And on every wall, portraits, Ashbrook ancestors, stiff-necked and cold-eyed, watching him with disdain that had outlived their flesh. Elias took it all in with a glance, his sharp eyes dancing from crack to shadow to misplaced speck of dust. Something was wrong about the air here, thick, but not with moisture or rot. With memory. The kind that settles in walls like mold. Mr. Pharaoh the butler hovered beside him, pale and half-translucent in the gloom. Your room is prepared, sir, the old man murmured. 3rd floor. East wing. The red door. I assume I'll be joining the other guests? You will find them, in the drawing room. They are expecting you. Of course they are, Elias said softly. He climbed the main staircase, footsteps echoing into the high vaults. As he passed the landing, a chill slid down his spine, not from the cold, but from the portrait mounted dead center on the wall. A woman in widow's black, veil drawn, hands gloved and folded. Her face was smudged, painted over at some point. Only the pale suggestion of her features remained. Beneath the painting, a brass plaque read, Lady Isadora Ashbrook, 1877 to 1914. She who kept the rooms. Kept the rooms? Elias moved on. The drawing room was a gallery of decay disguised as grandeur. Dust clung to the velvet drapes like a second fabric. The hearth was cold. And seated in an arc around a cracked chess table were the remaining heirs of the Ashbrook line. Genevieve, regal and sharp as winter glass, sipped something amber from a cut crystal glass. A dark choker circled her throat, and she wore black as if in permanent mourning. Edwin, broad-shouldered and impatient, stood by the fire with a whiskey bottle in hand. His jacket was expensive. His eyes were tired. Samuel, the youngest, sat curled on the edge of a leather armchair, his hands ink-stained, clutching a pocket notebook. A nervous energy buzzed around him. A 4th guest leaned against the window frame, a stranger to Elias. Tall, gaunt, with gloves and a cane. He did not introduce himself. Mr. Vane, Genevieve said coolly. We wondered when the vulture would arrive. Elias gave a faint smile. I don't feed on corpses. I study them. Charming, Edwin muttered. And what do you suppose you'll find here that the police didn't? The police weren't looking for a pattern, Elias replied. They were looking for a suspect. Those are rarely the same thing. Silence bloomed. Genevieve raised an eyebrow. You believe these murders are connected? I know they are. Elias stepped to the fire and pulled the photograph from his coat pocket. He placed it gently on the mantel. Do any of you recognize this? They gathered slowly. Eyes narrowed. Edwin paled. That's my grandfather. And his siblings. But this photograph was lost in the fire. Genevieve touched the image as if afraid it might burn her. This was taken before the schism, before the order ended. The order? Elias asked softly. The bleeding thorn, Samuel said suddenly, voice barely a whisper. They said it was just a story. A secret club for the Ashbrook heirs. But the legend says they made an oath. 7 of them. Elias nodded once. And 4 are dead. All by dagger. All in sealed rooms. No one spoke. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Then Genevieve turned away, walking slowly to the window. There's something you should know, Mr. Vane. She gestured toward the overgrown garden maze at the back of the manor, barely visible through the stained glass. There are 7 stone pedestals in the center of that maze, she said. 1 for each heir who took the oath. For decades they've remained bare. She turned back toward Elias. But this morning, one of them had a dagger on it. Chapter 4. The Family of 7. The library of Ashbrook Manor was a cathedral of secrets. Its domed ceiling rose high above the endless shelves, lined with tomes that hadn't been touched in decades. Dust danced in golden shafts of light filtering through the tall arched windows. A grandfather clock ticked faintly from the far end, steady and solemn, like a heartbeat too slow to belong to the living. Elias stood at the central reading table, where Genevieve had laid out the documents with unsettling precision. A family tree, sketched in hand-drawn lines on parchment the color of old bones. At the top, Reginald Ashbrook, the patriarch. A man known for 2 things, his ruthless business dealings and his obsession with bloodlines. Beneath him, 2 branches, one legitimate, one illegitimate. Both fed into 7 names, each encircled in red ink. They called themselves the 7 Daggers, Genevieve said. A pact made in 1899, sealed in blood, and bound by inheritance. A pact for what? Elias asked. To protect something, she replied. Though no one knows what. The family split after the Great War. A feud broke out. Letters were burned. Names erased. We were warned never to speak of the 7 again. Elias traced the names on the page. Thaddeus, the soldier. Isadora, the widow. Cornelius, the judge. Beatrice, the mystic. Walter, the twin. Giles, the mad one. And Elias, not him, but an ancestor. A name crossed out violently in black ink. Why is this one defaced? He asked. Genevieve glanced away. Because he broke the pact. Elias raised a brow. And what happened to him? No one answered. Only the wind outside tapped at the windows like knuckles on a coffin. Later that evening, Elias walked alone into the garden maze. It had rained. The earth was soft, and his boots sank slightly with each step. Thorn vines crept along the hedges, and old iron lanterns flickered weakly, casting strange shadows that slipped between the walls of green. He navigated the overgrown paths with careful memory, until he reached the center. There, in a circular clearing choked with ivy and thyme, stood 7 stone pedestals, arranged like the points of a heptagram. Each one bore a family crest carved into its face, weathered but unmistakable. 6 of them were empty. The 7th, center rear, had something placed on it. A dagger. Not identical to the murder weapon, but eerily similar. It gleamed with fresh oil, recently cleaned. A note had been tucked beneath it, protected by a glass dome. Elias gently lifted the glass and unfolded the paper. It bore a single line. 4 have fallen. 3 remain. The oath will be fulfilled. And underneath, drawn in dark red ink, a thorn crown. He stood still for a long moment, staring at the message. This is a ritual, he whispered. Not a series of murders. He glanced toward the thick maze entrance behind him, narrow, vine-covered, now cloaked in deepening fog. Something moved just out of sight. Elias turned sharply, eyes scanning the hedge lines, but the garden had gone silent. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that comes right before the scream. Chapter 5. The Room with No Keyhole. It happened at dawn. The manor stirred not with bird song or sunlight, but with a scream. A sound so sharp it pierced the fog outside and echoed through the corridors like a war cry from some forgotten age. Elias Vane was already awake, standing at his window in a half-buttoned shirt, staring out at the mist when the cry tore through the air. He didn't run. Elias never ran. He moved with purpose, coat flung over his shoulder, boots hitting the grand staircase with crisp, deliberate steps. At the landing, Mr. Farrow was waiting, ghost pale and shaking. Third floor. West wing. Lady Helena's room. Was, Elias corrected grimly. The west wing had been sealed for years, unused and untouched. Dust clung to every corner like frost, and time had warped the wallpaper into curling leaves. Yet someone had opened it. Recently. Elias stepped through the arched doorway into a corridor lined with stained glass windows, each one depicting an Ashbrook ancestor. They watched him as he passed, their painted eyes half-lidded with judgment. Room 317. The door stood ajar. No signs of force. No scratches on the lock. No hinges broken. Elias pushed it open and stepped into what should have been an ordinary bedroom. But the air felt wrong, compressed. As if the room were holding its breath. Lady Helena Ashbrook lay on the chaise by the window, her body folded like a marionette dropped mid-performance. Her expression was serene. Her eyes wide open. A dagger, matching the others, was embedded directly into her chest. The same crown of thorns on the hilt. But what caught Elias's attention first was not the dagger. It was the door. The inside of it was smooth. Seamless. There was no keyhole. No latch. No visible lock of any kind. Sealed from within, murmured Elias, crouching beside the body. And yet, he scanned the walls. The windows were stained glass and bolted shut with rusted iron. No broken glass, no loose panels. No fireplace. No trapdoors. A sealed room. An impossible murder. Who opened this room? He asked as Mr. Farrow appeared in the doorway. And no one, sir. It was kept locked. Only Lady Helena had the key. And where's the key now? Farrow blinked. That's just it. It's still on the inside. Elias looked down. Hanging from Lady Helena's neck was a silver chain. Attached was a small, antique key. Unused. He followed the line of her hand. One finger pointed to the wall across from the window. He walked to it. Nothing but faded wallpaper and a mounted mirror, dusty and unremarkable. Until he leaned closer. Beneath the edge of the frame, faint but deliberate, someone had carved a phrase into the wood. 6 remain to judge. 1 must awaken. Elias inhaled slowly. The pattern was growing clearer. Not just ritualistic, but strategic. Symbolic. Someone was recreating an oath that had once shattered this family, and doing so through deaths that rewrote the past in blood. He turned to Farrow. Bring me the floor plans for this wing. Every blueprint you can find. Of course, sir. And one more thing. Yes? Bar every room in this house. Bolt the windows. Seal the doors. If someone wants to kill again, make them work for it. He left the room without another word. Behind him, the mirror caught a flicker of movement. But when the dust resettled, it reflected nothing at all. Chapter 6. The Portrait That Watches. The wind that moaned through Ashbrook Manor that evening was not the kind that swept in from the sea or stirred the hedgerows. It came from the cracks in memory, from doorways that should never have been opened. Elias Vane stood at the end of a dim corridor in the east wing. His candle guttered slightly, the flame dancing nervously despite the still air. He had asked for floor plans of the manor, and they had arrived with a whisper of dread, delivered by a servant who refused to meet his eye. Among the dust-yellowed pages was a room not labeled on any modern blueprint. A chamber wedged between the east wing's upper hall and the servants' stairwell. No entrance. No door. Only a name written in faded ink across the page. The Gallery of the Inherited. Elias searched for hours before he found it. A section of wall in the second-floor corridor didn't match the rest. The wood was older, warped differently by time. A fine crack ran down the center like a wound. And when he pressed his gloved hand against it, something gave. The door opened with a soft groan, revealing absolute darkness beyond. He stepped inside. The room was small, almost suffocating, and smelled of linseed oil and moth-bitten canvas. As his candle cast its glow outward, faces emerged from the dark, portraits. Dozens of them. Mounted tightly together on every wall, floor to ceiling, in no clear order or timeline. Each one bore the same brass plaque, Ashbrook. Men, women, and children stared back from their wooden prisons. Some were pale with powdered wigs. Others wore military regalia. A few had no irises, just black dots. One was entirely in shadow, save for the faint glint of a smile. But there was one portrait in the center of the back wall that drew him in. A woman. Late 20s, perhaps. Auburn hair piled high in the fashion of the 1800s. Pale skin. Thin lips. But her eyes were blurred. As though the artist had tried to paint them again and again, each layer ruining the one beneath. The result was haunting. Her gaze seemed to shift as he moved. Beneath her frame, the plaque was different. It didn't say Ashbrook. It simply read, "She who watches." Elias's candle flickered violently. He stepped forward, studying the canvas. The paint had cracked in thin, almost vein-like lines across the surface. When he leaned in, he noticed something buried beneath the layers, scratches, as if someone had carved words directly into the wood before painting over them. He reached into his coat, pulled a scalpel he kept for such occasions, and began gently scraping away the edge of the paint near the bottom. The words appeared slowly, carved in sharp, desperate strokes. Underscore. She saw what none should see. She painted what none should remember. Now she watches all. Underscore. A creak echoed behind him. He turned quickly, candle raised. The door had closed. No breeze. No latch. Just closed. Elias walked to it, twisted the knob. It didn't budge. Locked. Behind him, a whisper, low, impossible to source. He turned again. The portrait of the woman was unchanged, except for her lips. They were now slightly parted. Just enough to show teeth. He backed away, breath steady but shallow, candlelight trembling. And then the eyes shifted. Not the illusion of movement, actual movement. The painted irises tracked him across the room. Slowly. Intentionally. Elias felt cold sweat bead at his collar. Then he heard it again. Clearer this time. A voice. From the painting. 6 remain, but not for long. The candle blew out. By the time he forced the door open and emerged into the corridor, Mr. Farrow was waiting. "You've seen the gallery," the butler said flatly. Elias didn't answer. "Then you've seen her." He nodded once, jaw tight. "Who is she?" Farrow's eyes didn't blink. "She painted the first dagger. The one used in the original ritual. She wasn't supposed to. They sealed her in that canvas." "They sealed her?" "Every family has its ghosts, sir," Farrow whispered. "Ours happens to watch." Elias glanced back at the closed door. The silence felt watched. And worse, felt remembered. Chapter 7: The Forgotten Society. The sky over Ashbrook Manor was gunmetal gray, the color of breath held too long. Rain hadn't begun, but the threat of it lingered in the air like an accusation. Inside the manor, Time itself felt slow, dragging like a wounded limb. Elias Vane sat in the manor's old study, surrounded by chaos masquerading as order. Stacks of brittle papers, ledger books, and yellowed envelopes were piled on the desk like miniature tombs. Somewhere in this crumbling archive, he was certain, lay the beginning of everything. Mr. Farrow had reluctantly delivered the key. "I'm not supposed to," the old butler had whispered. "But if someone doesn't stop this, it will begin again." The study smelled of mold and regret. The wallpaper had peeled into curls, revealing horsehair plaster beneath. A rusted chandelier hung above, and in the center of the room stood a locked cabinet, not of wood, but iron. It bore no keyhole. Instead, it had 7 vertical slits along its face, arranged in the shape of a crown. Elias frowned. Then he remembered the journal he'd found in the east stairwell 2 nights before, bound in faded crimson leather, a lock broken open at its clasp. He flipped through its pages again, this time more carefully. And there it was. A hand-drawn symbol, a thorn crown made of 7 daggers, blade down, tips meeting in a circle. Below it, the caption: "To bleed for the truth is to join the thorn." He paused. A faint smear of dried blood marked the edge of the page. Elias returned to the iron cabinet, studying the slits. Not just decorative. They were meant for something, specific blades. Each of the murdered heirs had died with a ceremonial dagger in their chest. 7 daggers to open the vault? He pulled the first from his coat, the one recovered from Lady Helena's body. Slowly, he inserted the blade into the corresponding slit. The iron groaned. A faint hiss escaped the cabinet, like a breath long held. One of 7 locks released. He didn't wait. Instead, he focused on the desk, rifling through documents that had escaped the fire. Behind a false panel in the drawer, he discovered something old, an invitation, hand-lettered in black ink and sealed with wax that had long since cracked. The paper read, _ "You are cordially summoned to the 13th midnight. The dagger ceremony will commence beneath the crimson lantern. Attendance is mandatory for the heirs of the 7. Your oaths shall be remembered. The bleeding thorn, _ A symbol was scrawled beneath the signature, the thorn-crowned dagger again, but this time dripping with ink, as though the symbol itself bled through the paper. Genevieve appeared at the doorway, watching him from the threshold. "You found it then," she said. Her voice was low, even, but carried something ancient beneath it, like stone breaking under its own weight. "The order was real," Elias said, rising slowly. "Not just a family legend. It was structured. Formal. Ritualistic." Genevieve nodded. "It began with the Old War, when the Ashbrooks and 6 other families controlled vast holdings. They feared revolution, so they formed the thorn. 7 heirs, bound by blood oaths and silence. Every generation, 7 more were chosen. Why the daggers? They were forged together, centuries ago. 1 from each family. When the pact was made, they were said to hold power." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Symbolic power?" She hesitated. "That's what we were told. And what happens?" he asked quietly. "When someone breaks the pact?" Genevieve looked away. "The records say one of the heirs tried to leave. Burned his mark. Rejected the oath. The others voted." "Voted? 6-1?" she whispered. "And so, he was the first." Elias leaned on the desk. "They killed him." Genevieve's voice cracked slightly. "They called it sealing the breach." A long silence passed. Then Elias asked, "What's beneath the crimson lantern?" She didn't answer. But the silence screamed she knew. That night, Elias lit a candle and returned to the cabinet. Only 1 dagger had been recovered. 6 remained. 6 keys. 6 more deaths? Or worse, 6 already chosen. And somewhere in this manor's crumbling heart, the crimson lantern waited. Chapter 8: The Fifth Room. Ashbrook Manor did not sleep. It only waited. That night, the rain arrived, sharp, cold needles that hammered against the stained glass windows and turned the garden paths to black veins of mud. Thunder trembled through the stone bones of the house. The storm masked footsteps, masked screams, masked everything. At precisely 2:17 a.m., a blood-curdling sound echoed through the manor. A sound not of rage or terror, but of discovery. Elias Vane was already awake, seated in a high-backed chair before the hearth in the drawing-room, glass of untouched whiskey in hand, when the butler burst in. "Sir, there's been another!" Elias was on his feet before the sentence finished. "Who?" "Master Caldwell." Elias blinked. "The stranger by the window?" Pharaoh nodded, face pale and pinched. "Room 206. Room 206 had once belonged to a visiting bishop, or so the brass plaque outside suggested. The door was locked from within, again. Elias stepped forward, examined it briefly, then shouldered it open with a hard snap. The lock splintered. The door swung inward. And there he was. Caldwell, tall, gaunt, his mouth slightly open as if caught mid-word, was seated upright in a wooden chair in the middle of the room. Not collapsed. Not sprawled. Posed. A dagger stood embedded in his chest, perfectly vertical, the blade sunk so deep the hilt brushed against his ribs. His hands were folded in his lap, and atop them lay a single object. A pocket watch, ticking steadily. Elias stepped closer. The hands of the watch had stopped at 2:17 a.m. The room was sealed as the others had been, windows bolted, chimney blocked, no trapdoors. But unlike the others, this crime scene had been curated. On the wall above Caldwell's head, someone had drawn a circle in soot. Within the circle, Elias recognized a familiar symbol, drawn with unnerving precision. A thorn crown, ringed in 7 dagger-shaped points. Beneath it, a phrase had been scrawled in sharp, slashing handwriting. He watched, but did not listen. The circle punishes silence. Pharaoh swallowed behind him. "Sir, that wasn't there earlier." Elias glanced back. "You saw him alive?" "Briefly. An hour before." He was pacing the hall, murmuring to himself. Did he speak to anyone? None of the family. But Pharaoh hesitated. He carried a letter. Crimson wax. No address. Another summoning. Elias muttered. He reached forward, inspecting the watch again. It was an antique, gold, French, early 1800s. But it had been modified. Inside the lid, etched into the glass with some sort of needle, was another phrase. The 5th must fall. The 6th must choose. Genevieve arrived moments later, breathless, wrapped in a black velvet cloak. "Caldwell?" she asked, eyes flicking to the body. "He was next," Elias said. But this wasn't just another death. This was theatrical. She looked at the soot symbol, her face hardening. He was one of them. One of the 7? She nodded once. My grandmother sighed. The Caldwell branch split off during the Great Rift, swore they'd never rejoin the thorn. Looks like someone else had different plans. Elias rose, hands behind his back. This is not random. This is not revenge. This is restoration. Restoration? Someone is rebuilding the order. That evening, back in the study, Elias laid out the daggers on a velvet cloth. 2 recovered. 5 to go. He stared at the pocket watch again, its ticking finally stopped. Not broken. Wound down. Intentionally. A message, he murmured to the empty room. And a timeline. He opened the watch once more and pressed gently against the etching. The needle scratches were uneven. Rushed. But beneath the last line, almost too faint to see, was something else. Initials. AR. Elias leaned back, pulse quickening. A missing heir? Or one no one remembers? He didn't sleep that night. And somewhere in the depths of the manor, a door opened without a sound. Chapter 9. The Whispering Butler. Dawn came reluctantly. A pale, soulless light filtered through Ashbrook Manor's tall windows like breath through stained glass. It did not warm the floors. It did not lift the chill. It simply made the shadows look more fragile, more uncertain, like they might shift if watched too long. Elias Vane hadn't slept. Instead, he traced patterns across the study's cold floorboards with his boots as the fire died to embers. Something about the fifth murder had changed the rhythm. There was a tone to it. A deliberate, theatrical cruelty, not just to kill, but to say something. And in every message, every carving, every dagger, the same motif. The thorned crown. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers and turned the pocket watch over one more time. AR. He had a theory. But he needed confirmation. And that meant going to the one man who had always known too much and said too little. He found Mr. Farrow polishing the silver in the formal dining hall. The butler moved mechanically, elegant, quiet, practiced. But there was something about his posture now, tense, guarded. He did not startle as Elias approached. "You've been with this family for how long?" Elias asked without preamble. 53 years, sir." Elias lit another cigarette. "Then you know who AR is?" The polished cloth paused. Farrow blinked at the silver tray in his hands. "I'm afraid I don't recall, sir." Elias exhaled smoke between his teeth. "You do. Because you signed the registry for room 206. You delivered the letter to Caldwell. You're not just a butler." The old man turned slowly, setting the tray down with careful reverence. "No, Mr. Vane," he said, voice low and lined with age. "I am not." Farrow led Elias down a hallway not marked on any current blueprint, a narrow, torchlit passage behind the west dining room, originally built for servants to pass unseen. They reached a black iron door with no knob. Farrow removed a key from his coat. A thin thing. Brass. Bent. He inserted it and turned. The door groaned open, revealing a small circular room lined with drawers. Elias stepped inside. It smelled of cedar, ink, and dust. The drawers were labeled in faded cursive. Wills. Confessions. Births unrecorded. Oaths broken. Burials disputed. Farrow gestured to the back wall. "This is the Ashbrook vault." "Not all family secrets go to the grave, Mr. Vane. Some are filed." Elias turned slowly. "Show me the unrecorded heir." Farrow moved toward the "Births unrecorded" drawer and pulled it open. Inside, a single folder. He handed it to Elias. The name on the front: Ashbrook, Alaric Rowan. Born 1981. Son of Sebastian Ashbrook and Adeline Rowan, a union unsanctioned by the family. Removed from records. Raised in secret. Marked ineligible to inherit. Below that, written in another hand: Oath offered. Oath refused. Exile enforced. Subject disappeared. Believed dead. But attached to the file was something else. A recent photograph. Elias felt his blood chill. It was Caldwell. Only younger. "Caldwell wasn't his name," Elias whispered. "It was an alias." Farrow nodded. "And you knew?" "I suspected," Farrow said. "The man arrived a month ago. Unannounced. He claimed he was writing a book on aristocratic decay. But I recognized the eyes." Elias set the file down slowly. "So someone found him. Killed him. And left a message." "More than that, sir," Farrow said softly. "They warned the rest." Elias turned to him, sharply. Warned? You said nothing before? Why now? Pharaoh's voice cracked for the first time. Because I received a letter too. He pulled it from his coat. Crimson wax. No seal. Inside, just one line. You served them in life. You will serve them in death. Elias studied the trembling in Pharaoh's hands. The man who had always appeared carved from wax and propriety was unraveling. They're not just targeting the heirs, Elias said grimly. They're targeting the infrastructure. The witnesses. The keepers. What will you do? Pharaoh asked. Elias's voice was cold steel now. I'm going to find the sixth dagger. He turned and strode from the vault. Outside, in the main hall, the grandfather clock struck 3. The chimes rang strangely. Not 7. Not 12. 13. Elias looked up, narrowing his eyes. He was being warned again. But this time, the killer wasn't ahead of him. They were near. Chapter 10. The Blood Oath Journal. The oldest wing of Ashbrook Manor was forbidden by tradition, not by locks. There were no warning signs. No creaking boards. No rattling chains. Just a sense, thick as dust, that you should not be here. Elias Vane entered anyway. He moved past faded tapestries and crumbling wall sconces, each step sounding sharper than it should. The portraits here had no names, no titles, just somber eyes and mouths pursed in disapproval. The only light came from a single wall-mounted lantern, flickering as if caught in a long breath. He reached room 104, once a study, long sealed behind layers of furniture and a wooden armoire. He had seen its outline on the oldest floor plan. Scribe's quarters. With effort, he shoved aside the blockade and broke the rusted lock. The door swung open with a sigh. Inside, stillness. Not abandonment. Not decay. Just a kind of holding. A dust-covered writing desk sat beneath a boarded window. On the far wall, a bookcase lined with crumbling tomes leaned forward like it was eavesdropping. The fireplace hadn't burned in 100 years, but its ash pan was clean. Too clean. Elias crossed the room and opened the desk drawers, old stationery, dried ink quills. But behind the drawer's false bottom, his fingers found something solid. Leather. Cracked. Faintly sticky. A book. The edges were stained dark. The pages smelled of iron. He pulled it free and laid it flat on the desk. Embossed in the cover was a symbol he now knew intimately. A thorned crown. Surrounded by 7 daggers. Beneath it, in faded gold, the true account of the oath, as witnessed by Giles Ashbrook. Elias opened it slowly. The first few pages were full of the kind of ceremonial language expected from a family steeped in secrets. Let the blade speak what the tongue may not. Let the blood bind where the law cannot. Let the 7 stand, so that none may fall alone. But then the writing changed, became more erratic, the ink darker, the lines sharper. Elias turned the page. The next entry had been scratched in with something far more violent than a quill. We were fools. We thought the daggers meant power. Legacy. Bloodline protection. But they are keys, not symbols. And something lies behind that door that should never be opened. He kept reading, breath held tight. Each dagger must taste blood to be claimed. Each bearer must kneel before the crimson lantern and swear in the dark. I watched Walter do it, shaking. Beatrice wept. Isadora, she smiled. God's help me, she smiled. Elias frowned. He remembered the portrait. She who kept the rooms. The next entry had no date. We voted. One spoke out. One refused. Elias Ashbrook. My brother. He said the pact was cursed. That the daggers were whispering. He tried to burn the room. We sealed him in instead. Elias froze. We sealed him in. He scanned the following entries quickly, each more fragmented, more broken than the last. The crimson lantern won't go out. Even when we sleep. Even when we forget. It stays lit beneath the manor. We thought it was to protect the family. But it was never about protection. It was about containment. If you are reading this, they are already dead. The 7 will fall. The circle must close. The door beneath the chapel must remain sealed. There was one final note, scrawled in a hand barely legible, ink splattered, lines jagged, as if written mid-panic. Underscore. They come for me now. I hear the scraping. Don't trust the silence. It listens. Underscore. Elias turned the final page. Pressed inside, nearly fused to the parchment, was a torn scrap of paper with a map, a side view of the manor's foundation. Beneath the chapel, a narrow passage led to a hidden chamber. Labeled simply, "The Room of Red Glass." The silence in the room felt heavier now. He slid the journal into his coat, eyes sweeping the walls one last time. Then, a sound. Behind him. Not a creak. Not a sigh. A whisper. Giles was wrong. Elias spun, hand on his cane sheath, but the room was empty. Only the lantern on the wall flickered brighter for a single second, then extinguished with a pop. He left quickly. Back in the study, Elias laid the journal on the table beside the daggers. He lit every candle in the room. He made coffee he wouldn't drink. And he circled one name again and again in his notebook. Isadora. Her smile in the portrait had never looked quite so pleased. Chapter 11. The Heir Who Vanished. Rain washed against the windows of Ashbrook Manor like a confession no one wanted to hear. Elias Vane sat in the velvet gloom of the east parlor, the blood oath journal open before him, pages weighted down by half-melted candle stubs. He had copied the names of the original 7 daggers into his own notebook, crossing out each confirmed death, one by one. All but one. Alaric Rowan Ashbrook. The bastard son. The exile. The unfinished thread. Official records claimed he died in a boating accident off the coast of Dover at 17. No body was recovered. No service held. Just a letter from the family solicitor announcing that Alaric would no longer be recognized as a living heir. But as Elias had learned, Ashbrooks never bury the truth. They just rename it. In the west drawing room, behind a locked cabinet of music boxes and broken clocks, Elias found something strange, an old cigar box labeled Sebastian. Sebastian Ashbrook, Alaric's father. A recluse by the end. Died in 2002, alone, with a locked room and a fire poker driven through the floorboards beneath his bed. Inside the box, dried violets, a pocket knife, 3 black and white photographs, and a letter. Elias unfolded it carefully. Underscore. To the one who dares ask. Alaric lives. He made me swear it would remain hidden. He said the daggers weren't just keys, they were mouths. That they whispered in sleep. That they could summon memory into shape. He said the order must fall, not be rebuilt, not revived. Destroyed. All of it. I saw his eyes the night he vanished. He wasn't afraid. He was ready to become something else. Underscore. Essay. Elias sat back slowly. So the exile didn't just flee. He made himself disappear on purpose. To break the circle. But now the circle was being reformed. So where was Alaric? He took the letter to Genevieve. She met him in the solarium, where rain beaded on the glass ceiling like mercury. This is impossible, she said, rereading it. He drowned. I was 10 when it happened. Did you see the body? No. Did anyone? Genevieve fell silent. Elias pressed. What do you remember of him? She hesitated. He was strange. Brilliant. Obsessed with numbers, history, codes. He used to sneak into the crypt beneath the chapel and copy the wall inscriptions by candlelight. Did he ever speak of the daggers? Constantly. He believed each one had a twin meaning, that the blade wasn't for blood, but for memory. He called them mnemonic knives. Mnemonic knives, Elias repeated. That's why the murders feel so specific. How so? Each one is tied to a forgotten truth, a disavowed heir, a broken pact, a lost name. He's not just killing heirs, he's rewriting the family's record. That night, Elias returned to his quarters. The hallway was darker than usual. One of the candelabras had gone cold. And on the floor outside his door was a piece of folded paper. No wax seal. Inside, a single line of writing in crimson ink. _ You found me once. Now find the door you never opened. _ Elias turned the page over. A floor plan. Very old. The original blueprint of Ashbrook Manor, drawn in 1823. In red, someone had circled a tiny sublevel beneath the crypt, marked only with a note. 8th room, ashes only. Elias narrowed his eyes. There were 7 daggers. But maybe there were 8 stories. Chapter 12, A Dance with Daggers. Ashbrook Manor had not hosted a gathering in decades. But on the 12th night, beneath chandeliers restored for the occasion, the estate awoke to music once more. A masquerade ball. Officially, it was held in memory of the fallen heirs, a somber, elegant farce meant to reassure the guests that all was well, that the murders were done, and that the past could be polished clean with wine and chamber music. But Elias Vane knew better. He stood near the back of the ballroom, dressed in formal black, mask shaped like a raven's beak, drink untouched in his gloved hand. The chandelier above threw golden light across the polished floor, where guests twirled in sweeping circles, velvet, lace, antlers, mirrors, ivory feathers. Some masks smiled. Others snarled. One, he noticed, wept. Genevieve stood at the head of the room, in widow's black, wearing a thin silver domino mask. Her eyes met Elias's across the room. A nod. A breath held. They both knew. This was a stage. And somewhere on it was the killer. An hour into the evening, the music shifted. The quartet, seated near the hearth, began a piece none of them remembered learning. A melody of minor chords and unnatural time signatures, like a waltz slowed and stretched. The violinist's hand trembled on the string. Then, as the final note hung in the air, the scream. Guests parted like silk torn by wind. One of the dancers, a man in a crimson tailcoat and a pure white mask, collapsed to the floor in the center of the room. A dagger protruded from his back, straight between the shoulder blades. No sign of struggle. No scream before the fall. Just impact. Panic surged, but Elias moved fast, already at the body. He rolled the man onto his back and removed the mask. It wasn't his face. The skin beneath was waxen. Fake. A rubber mask beneath the porcelain one. Elias reached beneath the collar and found the true face beneath, smeared with adhesive, mouth sewn shut. Dead before the dance. The killer had disguised the body, costumed it, and danced it through the ballroom like a puppet. A note had been pinned beneath the hilt of the dagger. A familiar handwriting. _ 6 have fallen. The 7th remembers. When the song ends, the door will open. _ The guests gasped. Genevieve clutched Elias's arm. Is it him? Elias didn't answer. He was too focused on the dagger. This one was different. It had been shattered and repaired. The blade had a hairline crack running through it, fused with gold. He drew in a slow breath. The broken dagger. What does it mean? Genevieve whispered. That this wasn't a murder. This was a warning. To who? Elias looked at her gravely. To me. Later, in the silence of the drawing room, Elias examined the gold-fused dagger again. The handle bore no crest. No family sigil. Just a word etched in a circular script. M-E-N-E. He copied it into his notes. Then opened the blood oath journal again. On the final page, next to Giles Ashbrook's scrawled confession, there was a phrase he hadn't noticed before, written in mirror ink, only visible now by candlelight. He held the page closer. The broken blade bears the key. The key bears the name. Speak it at the crimson lantern, and the door will open. Elias stood slowly, heart pounding. Mean! Outside, the wind howled louder. The portraits rattled in their frames. And far beneath the chapel, a red glow flickered to life behind an ancient door. Chapter 13 Midnight Confession. The storm outside raged with a voice older than wind. Thunder rolled low across the hills, like the growl of something vast and waking. The rain did not fall in droplets, it slammed against the manor in sheets, trying to get in, or perhaps, trying to drown out what was about to be said. Elias Vane stood in the tower study, where the walls were lined with clockwork curiosities and journals sealed with ribbon and wax. The fire had long since died. He hadn't lit it. This meeting needed cold air and a clear mind. Genevieve stood at his side, pale and composed, arms wrapped around herself not from fear, but anticipation. Across from them sat Lillian Hollow, once a distant Ashbrook cousin, now a frail, hunched woman in mourning black. She had not spoken much since arriving at the manor 2 days earlier. She moved with hesitation. But tonight something in her eyes had changed, glassy no longer, but focused. Determined. You wanted the truth, she whispered. So listen, Mr. Vane. And listen well. Elias said nothing. He only opened the journal he'd been keeping, and waited. I was 12 the night they made the oath beneath the crimson lantern, Lillian began. I wasn't meant to be there. I was hiding in the crypt. My brother had dared me to spend a night among the bones. She paused. Rain tapped on the windows like an impatient finger. At midnight they came. 7 of them. Hoods. Daggers. They formed a circle around a lantern that burned red, not from flame, but from something else. An oil. Old. Alchemical. I remember the smell. Roses. Ash. Blood. Each one stepped forward and cut their palm. The blood dropped into a bowl. The lantern flared. And then... She faltered. And then they weren't alone. Elias leaned forward slightly. Who was there? Lillian met his eyes. Her voice turned flat. Cold. Something came up through the floor. Not physically. Like a shape in smoke. The air froze. The blood boiled. They all dropped to their knees and said a name. I couldn't hear it. I wasn't meant to. Genevieve's voice was faint. And then? The youngest of them, Giles, began to scream. He said they'd summoned it wrong. That one of them hadn't bled. That the circle was cracked. Lillian looked at Elias with something like pity. The only way to seal it again was to bury it beneath the manor. Behind that door. Behind the room of red glass. Elias closed his notebook. What is it? What did they trap? Lillian's lip trembled. Memory. Elias frowned. What? Not just memory as we know it. Memory made flesh. Everything the Ashbrooks tried to forget. The betrayals, the sins, the murders, the madness, it all fed something. It became something. The blood. The oaths. The forgetting. That room doesn't contain a demon, Mr. Vane. It contains consequence. A long silence. Elias stood slowly, Then whoever's killing the heirs, Lillian nodded, is doing it to finish the ritual, to unseal it. And once the seventh dagger is returned, and the seventh blood spilled, that door will open. Genevieve whispered, What happens then? Lillian didn't speak. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out something wrapped in velvet. A dagger. The third one Elias had been searching for. I've kept it hidden for 30 years, she said. But I can't protect it anymore. Elias took it. Heavy. Warm. The sigil etched into the hilt was a flame curling into the shape of a serpent. The flame dagger, Lillian said. It belonged to Beatrice Ashbrook, the mystic. Elias stared at it for a long moment. Then quietly, Has anyone else heard this story? She shook her head. If they had, they'd already be dead. Later that night, Elias returned to the chapel. He stood before the stone altar, rain still hammering on the roof above, lightning blooming like paper fire through the stained glass. He lit a candle and spoke the name carved into the dagger's hilt. Mean! The air shifted. The wall behind the altar trembled, just slightly. Stone to breath. And from deep below the chapel floor, a lantern flickered red. Chapter 14. The Chapel Crypt. The door behind the altar was not made of wood or stone. It was made of memory. At first, Elias Vane saw only a trick of the candlelight, shadows pulling strangely against the chapel wall, as though drawn inward, like ink soaked into parchment. But as he stepped closer, the wall breathed. Stone gave way. Not shattered. Not broken. Just yielded. Like it remembered him. And then it opened. A cold draft spilled from the hidden passage, carrying the scent of wet stone, ancient dust, and iron. Elias descended carefully, each step echoing against the tight stone spiral. The air grew thick, humid, heavy, like a cathedral buried alive. He passed old sconces, their brackets rusted, the candles long rotted to black nubs. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a vaulted chamber lit faintly by a single, guttering lantern, the flame burning red. Not fire red. Blood red. The crimson lantern. It hung from a hook in the ceiling, above a stone circle inlaid with 7 beds of carved black marble. Each one was engraved with a name. Elias stepped into the circle and began reading them aloud, one by one. Thaddeus Ashbrook. Isadora Ashbrook. Beatrice Ashbrook. Cornelius Ashbrook. Walter Ashbrook. Giles Ashbrook. Elias Ashbrook. He stopped at the last. His namesake. The brother who tried to break the pact. The one they had sealed in. The bed was scorched, cracked. A single iron chain lay curled atop it like a shed serpent. A mark was burned into the headstone, 3 concentric circles, etched with shaking lines, as though drawn from the inside. He didn't die here, Elias whispered. He changed here. Then he noticed something strange. Of the 7 stone beds, 6 were undisturbed. But one, Isadora's, had been shattered. Her nameplate cracked. The stone around it scattered like teeth. Scratches dug into the ground where her bed had been. Elias crouched, brushing aside debris. Beneath the stone was soil. Black. Damp. Fresh. A hole. Roughly 6 feet deep, square cut, too sharp to be natural. But empty. A grave, Elias whispered. That was filled. Then dug up. He touched the earth. Still cold. Still breathing. The red light from the lantern pulsed slightly. A low vibration passed through the air, like the groan of a cello string pulled too tight. He turned his gaze upward. Beneath the lantern, a symbol had been inlaid into the floor. A circle of thorns enclosing a mirror, cracked in 7 lines. His fingers brushed it. And just for a moment, the chamber changed. The lantern burned brighter. The air turned electric. And shadows stood where the stone beds lay empty. 7 figures. Robed. Faceless. Watching him. Then, gone. Elias stumbled backward, heart hammering. The red glow returned to its low flicker. But now he understood. This wasn't just a crypt. This was the site of the first ritual. The first memory made flesh. And someone with knowledge, motive, and ancestral right, was trying to recreate it. He turned to leave. And stopped. Footprints. Not his. Smaller. Bare. Damp. Leading from the shattered grave, back up the stairs. Whoever disturbed the grave had already returned to the surface. And left the door open for him to follow. As he climbed, the air grew warmer. At the top of the stairs, something was waiting for him on the chapel altar. A single white lily. Fresh. Its petals tipped in crimson.
The case may be closed for now, but mysteries always leave behind new questions. If you enjoyed this investigation, leave a like. Every clue you find keeps the trail alive. Share your theories in the comments. Your mind might be sharper than you think. And subscribe to our channel Detective Mystery Stories, where every case hides a deeper secret, and every secret deserves to be uncovered. The next mystery is already waiting for you.